Al-Hakeem wa in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, most gracious, most merciful, all praise and glory due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. All praise and glory due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, who allowed us to come here today and worship Him. And we ask and beg of Him at the time that we spend here, both in actual prayer and the time that we spend in between to say Assalamu alaikum to each other, and the time in between that we do to drink water and to listen to this small talk and pray with it and drive back home, that every single second we spend out of our comfort of our beds is accepted as a form of worship to Him. And we ask and beg of Him for sincerity from our hearts to purify the disease of pride and arrogance, to purify the disease of wanting others to think good of us from our hearts, so inshallah it is accepted from us. And we ask Allah to send peace and blessings upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I have an exciting topic to talk about today, and I was kind of looking forward to tell a story related to this name. And I like how all the guys went up against the wall, because we're all old men up against the wall. That's okay. The topic of today's talk was Al-Hakeem, right? The name of Allah, Al-Hakeem. So I want to first go over what's the purpose of these names of Allah, right? We keep talking about all the 99 names of Allah, but what's the purpose of them? And the scholars kind of break down the reason for the names in three different categories. The first one is to kind of remind us of the oneness of Allah, right? We can think of specific names that remind us of the oneness of Allah, right? Allah itself is one of those names, right? That reminds us of the uniqueness and the oneness of Allah Ta'ala, right? The first, the last, right? The one who expands, right? These are words that only Allah Ta'ala could have this characteristic. The eternal, right? These are very unique to Allah Ta'ala alone. The second reason these names exist is to make us get to know Allah Ta'ala better. What are His attributes, right? These are names that we know very commonly. We talked about some already, right? Rahman, Rahim, the merciful, the forgiving, right? The generous, the just. These are all characteristics of Allah Ta'ala that because we learn them, we love Him more, and we strive to have those ourselves. Right? We want to be merciful. The best way we want Allah Ta'ala's mercy is to be merciful to others. The best way to get Allah Ta'ala's generosity is to be generous to others. These are characteristics that we all strive for, and we love Allah Ta'ala for having. The last category, the third reason the names exist, is to remind us of the perfection of Allah Ta'ala in His perfection. Al-Hakeem, the scholars say, is the name that defines this the most. Because the word Hakeem doesn't just mean the wise, right? We translate it into English, the wise, but it means the perfection in His wisdom. Somebody who's perfect in His wisdom. This is a characteristic only Allah Ta'ala can have. Right? Allah Ta'ala knows, Allah tells us in the ayahs in the Quran, right? Allah Ta'ala knows every single leaf, right? In number. Everything, all existence, He knows in number, right? So what does that mean to me? That means that every single tree that ever grew on any single leaf that ever grew on any tree since the beginning of time, that grew on that tree from a little baby bud to a leaf, and then shriveled up and fell to the earth, Allah Ta'ala knows every single one in number. He knows the story of each one of those leaves. All the stars we see in the sky, and when we learn biology, in science, right? The states of the star from, the dark star, and then it kind of explodes into a supernova. We all remember the supernova because that was the fun part, right? The nice picture. And it takes millions and millions of years for that to happen. Allah knows every single star in the sky, the story of them, where they exist, when it happened, every single molecule that it took to make hydrogen into helium and cause a fusion bomb to cause the spark of a star. Allah knows every single molecule and number. More importantly, not just the number of things, but the purpose of them and the meaning of them and the beginning and end of them. And the use of them for us. And how they praise Allah Ta'ala just by their existence. So the story I'm going to tell you is one that you may have heard before, but I'm going to try to tell it in a different way than you've heard it. Once a man came to Musa alayhi salam, right? And he said, "Oh Musa, who's the most wise person on earth? I'm paraphrasing the story, by the way. And Musa said, out of sincerity, because he didn't know of any other man who knew as much as he did about Allah and about revelation and about the way things work, he said, I am. And so because of this conversation, Allah Ta'ala wanted to kind of teach Musa and teach us forever the following parable that occurred shortly thereafter. Musa was ordered by Allah Ta'ala to find a man, right, who was named Al-Khidr, right? The green guy, right? If you just translate it to English, he was the guy who was green, okay? And maybe that was because he wore green clothes or for some other reason we don't really know. But I'm going to say that he wore green clothes, because that's the way I always imagine the story. And so Musa goes on a hunt for Al-Khidr. He wants to find him because he's going to learn something from this man. And so he goes and goes, and the story of him finding him is pretty unique and actually humbling for Musa by itself, but I'm not going to do that part of the story for the sake of time. Eventually Musa finds him. He finds this man who Allah has told him, go find the green guy because from him you're going to learn some things that you would have never have thought you would have known, right? That wisdom that you thought you had is minuscule compared to the wisdom of him and in comparison to the wisdom of Allah. And so he meets him and he says, you know, I am Musa, I am a prophet of Allah, I've been told to come to you. I really just want to follow you. I want to be your apprentice. I want to be your intern. I want to follow you around to see what you do so maybe I can learn something from you. Is that okay? And so the green guy turns to him and says, I don't think you could handle what I do. And I think that I have some really important things to do. And you asking a lot of questions is not within that agenda of me to fulfill the things I have to do. So I don't think you can handle this. And Musa said, no, I'm going to try my best. I'm just going to listen and watch and observe you and learn the best I can from you and those things. And the man said, okay, fine. And so then the man did a couple of things that really boggled Musa's mind. The first thing he did was, he went to a river and he saw a perfectly good ship sitting there on the side of the river. It was a fishing boat. And the man, for no reason at all, at least it seemed to Musa, went to the boat, made a hole in it, and made it sink. And so Musa looked at the Khidr and said, hey, like, why would you do that? This boat, the guy was just an innocent guy, you don't even know him. This is the way he makes money and feeds his family. And you just sunk his boat. And the Khidr turns to him and says, listen, I told you weren't going to be able to be patient with me and you weren't going to understand what I was doing, but I don't have time for this conversation. So you can leave me if you like. And Musa said, no, I'm sorry. I told you what I was going to do. I'm going to stick to the plan. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. I'm going to figure out what's going on and learn the best of you I can. I want you to imagine for a moment now the man whose boat was sunk. He woke up one morning, expected to go put out his fishing nets and go fish and get some fish and sell it in the market. And do his normal daily routine, and he maybe lived day to day off this fish, and we say off paycheck to paycheck. Maybe he lived that way too, right? Maybe he lived off of, he didn't know if he was going to have enough to eat unless he caught some fish and sold it, so his family could be warm and have food and feed his kids. And he goes out to this boat that he has worked his whole entire life, and his whole entire sustenance comes from this thing, and he finds there's a hole in it. And he becomes very sad. But he says, maybe he says, Alhamdulillah, I'll try my best, I'll try to repair the boat, and I won't complain, I'll do my best, and this is qadr Allah, and maybe that's all I have. I'll come back to him afterwards. Dhul Khidr then goes to the second part of the story. They knock on the door of a family, and it's about nighttime, and they want a place to stay. And it was custom at that time that anytime a stranger or a traveler knocked on your door, you let them stay in your house for a night, or maybe 3 nights, to have some sleep, to give them some food, until they're on their way again. And so when they knocked on the door, the people were extremely rude to them. They were just straight up rude to them, right? They pretty much said, here's some things, and they shut the door and said, you're not really welcome here. And Musa was a little upset about that. But Dhul Khidr didn't seem so upset. And they kind of walked around in the area where that home was of those kind of rude people, and they said, they saw this kind of broken wall. So the fence, this kind of big brick wall where that kind of blocked off the area where this house was broken. And it was owned by those rude people, at least it seemed so. And Dhul Khidr said, let's make this wall, let's fix the wall. And so Musa kind of watched him fix this wall for these really rude people and didn't understand why. He said, why would you do this? These people were obnoxious, they were rude, they had no manners. Why are you doing them a favor? I'm not saying anything bad to them, I'm saying, but why would you do a favor and fix this wall for them? And Dhul Khayd turned to him and said, hey, I told you that you wouldn't be patient enough for me, and you wouldn't understand what was going on, and you were going to ask me all these questions, and I didn't have time for these questions. And Musa says, oh no, I'm sorry. I'll keep my mouth shut, learn the best I can from you, and I'll keep going with you. And Dhul Khayd said, okay. I want you to imagine that obnoxious, rude family that was in the house. The next morning, after they were rude to some travelers, they woke up and saw this broken wall that they'd always kind of seen as the sore eye. It was going to take a lot of time to fix. But all of a sudden, boom, it's sparkling, brand new, beautiful wall. They don't have to worry about it anymore. And they probably jumped around and maybe had a party about why this wall was magically built again overnight. They didn't understand why or who would do this for them. And they said, oh man, this is just a miracle. It just happened. It's great. And we'll come back to them afterwards. The last part of the story, Dhul Khayd did the thing that's kind of out of the box, right? It's kind of a little bit out there, right? He goes up to a child on a playground. He kind of almost picks out a child randomly, it seems, and he breaks his neck and kills him. And this is it. Now Musa just he can't hold it in, right? And he's like, what are you doing? You just killed an innocent kid for no reason. His parents love him and they're going to cry for him every single day because of this. He was just an innocent kid. Why would you do this? And so Dhul Khayd, right, the green guy said, okay, this is where our conversation, our journey together ends. But let me explain a little bit to you about what was happening. But first, before I tell you what he said, I want you to imagine the parents of the child that died. The love of parents for their baby, for their child, is so strong, right? That mothers lift cars for their kids when they're worried about their danger, right? They stay up in the middle of the night to feed them, and when they get a fever, the fathers run to CVS Pharmacy and get Tylenol in the middle of the night, right? No matter how tired they are, no matter how early work is, right? They watch them grow and they can't wait for them to succeed, and they put their lives in front of theirs. These parents now come to the playground and see their child dead, the thing that they love most in this world gone. And they're sad and they cry about it every single night. And maybe they cry and they have no answer as to why this happened, who this guy in the green clothes was that came and killed their son and then disappeared. We don't know why this happened. And we'll come back to them. So back to Musa and Dhul Khayd says, okay, this is the end of our journey together, but let me explain to you what it was that I was doing. He said, well, let's go back to the boat. The boat was owned by a very, very, very good Muslim man, by a righteous person. And the king of that, who owned that river, wanted all of the fish for himself. So what he did was he sent people down the river and broke down every single ship and destroyed it to smithereens. Like, he broke it down so they were unrepairable and just gone forever. But when those people came to the boat that had a hole in it, they said, it's already broken, we don't have to do anything to it. So they let it be. And the next couple of days, the man repaired the boat by himself, and guess what? He was the only boat who was fishing anymore on the river. So guess who got all the fish? He did. And because he got all the fish, he had all the money he needed for his family, and he lived a very comfortable life because he never had to worry about food again, because he was the only fisherman left on the river. And so this man, never understanding why or who put a hole in his boat, now, many, many, many years later recognizes, subhanAllah, if I only had the wisdom to understand that when these bad things happen to me and I think that they're bad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most wise. And that these things that happen to me end up being the best thing for me. The absolute best thing for me. The second part of the story, the wall that was built for the rude people. Those people came out and celebrated when they saw their wall built. And they probably had dinner and kunafa and all this other stuff, right? But then what happened? Dhul Khayd explains that under that wall, if it just broke down a little bit more, there was a humongous treasure. A lot of gold sitting under that wall. And if the owners of that house, those obnoxious, rude people, saw a couple of more bricks fall down, they would have seen that gold and kept it for themselves. But there were two orphans who were children of very righteous people who passed away. And they themselves, when they grow up, were going to be very righteous. And I wanted it to be theirs. And Allah Ta'ala wanted it to be theirs because it was rightfully theirs. And so, I built it perfectly, the wall, so that when they were old enough, they themselves would discover the treasure underneath when the wall breaks down 20 years from now. And it was meant for them. But imagine, those orphans, when they woke up 20 years from now, would never understand that 20 years prior, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set something in the start of a cycle, a chain reaction that would grant them what they needed when they were older. And those obnoxious, rude people had no idea that because of their rudeness, a perceived, right, they thought something good happened, really it deprived them of a humongous treasure. So without wisdom, they had no idea what was going on. The last story, the most kind of serious story, right? When a child died. Musa was like, okay, so I understand the first two, but what happened with this last one? I can't explain in my mind how you could justify that this would somehow be good. And Dhul Khidr said, this child was the child of two wonderful people. Two people who praised Allah every single day. And were good people who treated everybody right. And they used their money for the poor people. And they prayed day and night. And they fasted. They did everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expected of them. And this child, though he seemed good for the few seconds we saw him, was going to grow up and make their lives miserable. He was going to grow up and test them so hard it would affect their Islam, would affect their deen. And they would maybe turn away from Allah ta'ala, or at least live a terrible life. And so, I knew that when I would kill this child, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised that they would have another child that would grow up and treat them the way that they deserve to be treated, and respect them, and take care of them, and nourish them, and give them everything they needed as parents when they were older. And he would be a good example for everybody, and be a reason for them in Jannah. I want you to imagine those parents now. Those parents came out that day and saw the saddest thing they could have ever imagined. They saw everything they could have ever thought in their life as beautiful and love, and their child dead. That it was lost forever. And they thought that this child was irreplaceable. Naturally, they thought, there's no way that I could ever love some child as much as I love this baby that was mine. But subhanAllah, because they were righteous, they remained patient. Even though they were sad, they remained patient. And Allah, through Allah Ta'ala's wisdom, they then received a child that was so much better for them, that will love them the way that they love them. And more importantly, when you think about it, it would have been the reason that they entered Jannah. And guess who they get to see in Jannah? The little child who they loved so much in the dunya that died as a child and is guaranteed Jannah because he's a child. And so they received, and so in the end they received both children in Jannah together, a promise from Allah Ta'ala. This is what it means when I say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Hakeem, is the most perfect in His wisdom. Every single thing that happens to us, whether it's we fall and we scratch our knee, or we fail a test, or we make a big mistake and get grounded and get in trouble, or heartbreak, or somebody dies that we love, all these things, if you were to take them at face value, you would be very, very hurt and sad and upset. But if you but remember that Allah Ta'ala has told us that He is the most wise, and He loves us more than a mother loves his child. Prophet Muhammad says that Allah Ta'ala loves His slave more than a mother loves his child, or more than a mother bird loves its chick, right? So Allah loves you more than anything. He loves you and cares about you. So when something bad happens, you may think, hey, this is terrible, this is horrible, I want to cry about this, or be really sad about this, or be angry about this. But Al-Hakeem, Allah Ta'ala says, I know what is good for you. And the things that you may perceive to be bad are actually good. And sometimes the things that you see as good are actually bad. And so are we better than tonight and from here on out, whenever anything good or bad happens, we say Alhamdulillah and oh Allah, we do not know if this thing that happened, whether good or bad, was actually good or bad for our akhirah, and good or bad for our ultimate ends. So Allah Ta'ala, make it good for us, and make our hearts accepting of that which you test us with. So we ask Allah Ta'ala together that He makes us of those who understand that His tests are but a way for us to get closer to Him. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to make us of those who do not fail His test in this dunya, and instead gain His reward in the akhirah. And we ask Allah Ta'ala, the turner of hearts, to turn our hearts towards His deen, towards His Quran, and towards His Prophet and Prophets. May Allah Ta'ala send peace and blessings upon them. So I'll conclude this talk now with that. Inshallah, we'll pray 4 more rak'ahs, pray Shafar with and make dua together.